Hello and welcome to my video all about knitting the brioche stitch. Brioche is my absolute favourite stitch. It's very beginner friendly and looks particularly good if you use chunky needles and yarn. As you can see, I have done brioche stitch for a small section of this knitting. You can tell it's brioche because of the valleys and ridges. It has great depth, the brioche stitch, and is particularly good for anything like a blanket or scarf where you need it to be reversible and really cozy. The first thing you need to do is cast on a number of stitches that is divisible by both 3 and 2. So that's a number in both the 3 and 2 times tables. In this case I'm using 18 stitches. You can start the brioche stitch immediately after you cast on, or like me, you can do a different stitch first and then switch to brioche. Brioche is a very simple repeated pattern, and the very first stitch is a slipped stitch. Now what you need to do is slip a stitch purlwise, which means you take your right hand needle, go into the top stitch on the left needle, as if you're going to purl it. But instead of purling it, you simply just pull it off the end of the needle. No stitching required. Now for the next bit you have to make sure that the yarn is not wrapped around the right hand needle and is at the front towards you. You then do a K2tog Decrease. This means that you go up through the top 2 stitches on the left hand needle rather than just the one like you normally would when you knit. You then do a regular knit stitch but with 2 stitches together rather than 1. You'll notice that because the yarn is at the front before you do the K2tog, you have to take the yarn around the right hand needle. You have to wrap it round the right hand needle in order to bring it to the back and complete the knit stitch. The moving of the yarn from the front to the back during the K2tog stitch is what creates a yarn over. Now a yarn over is an increase technique, and I will explain that slightly more in a minute. As you can see on the right hand needle now, you have 3 stitches. The first stitch is the one that you slipped. The second stitch is a yarn over increase, which you basically made out of thin air by taking the yarn from the front to the back during the process of making the K2tog stitch. And then the third stitch here is obviously the K2tog Decrease. And because you have a single increase in the yarn over and a single decrease in the K2tog, they balance each other out, so the number of stitches doesn't increase overall. The last part of this repeated pattern simply involves bringing the yarn from the back of the needles, through the centre of the needles and back to the front again. And then you repeat the whole thing again. So you slip a stitch purlwise to start with, you then do a K2tog Decrease. You don't have to think about doing the yarn over, but that is what is created when you take the yarn from the front all the way to the back in order to complete the K2tog. And then you bring the yarn back to the front again. I'm now going to complete the row, just repeating those steps I've already showed you again and again and again until I reach the end of the row. I will then show you what to do on the second row. And now here we are on the second row. You'll notice that the stitches look a bit different on the needle now. There is one straight stitch and then there are 2 that appear to be crossed. Then another straight stitch and 2 that appear to be crossed, and so on and so forth all the way down the needle. The repeating pattern, however, is exactly the same on the second, third row and every other row of the brioche stitch. So you just carry on like on the first row. So you slip the first stitch purlwise, and with the yarn at the front you do a K2tog decrease, and then you bring the yarn forward. You'll notice actually that the fact that the stitches are a bit crossed over makes it a lot easier to do the K2tog decreases on the second row, which actually makes it very beginner friendly and a lot easier than the first row. So I'm just going to work until the end of the row, and then I'm going to show you a line of stitching that I do after the brioche stitch and before I either cast off or carry on to a different type of stitch. It is possible to go from brioche stitch straight into casting off or a different type of stitch, but what I like to do is just an extra line after the brioche stitch. This makes it a lot easier to me anyway. It's not vital and you don't have to do this, but it just makes it easier, I think, to then go on to a different stitch or cast off, because it orders all the stitches nice and evenly again, and there's none of this crossing over of stitches. Now to do this line, what I do is simply repeat KFB and then K2tog. Now KFB is knit front back increase, whereas K2tog is obviously a knit two together decrease. So you're just doing a increase and a decrease and so on until the end of the row. Just like the yarn overs and K2togs in the brioche stitch, they are increases and decreases that balance each other out, and therefore the overall number of stitches does not go up or down. To do a KFB, a knit front back, you do all the steps of a normal knit stitch up until the point where you push the stitch off the end of the needle. Instead of doing that, you swing the right hand needle tip round to the back. Then take the right hand needle tip down through the top of the top stitch. And then you wrap the yarn around the back needle, just like you would in a knit stitch, and complete the knit stitch, like so. And the needle comes out on top of the stitch on the left hand needle. You push a stitch off, and now you have 2 stitches on your right hand needle when you started with just the one on the left hand needle. So that is a single increase. Notice that throughout this entire row I have the yarn at the back this time, not at the front, at the back. And then for the crossed over stitches I do a K2tog, which is really easy. And then you just repeat those steps over and over, so KFB, K2tog, KFB, K2tog until the end of the row. So here it is after that last row, and all the stitches are all nicely ordered and evenly spaced, ready to start whatever you want to do from then on in, which could be casting off or a different type of stitch. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it and learnt something. Thank you.